Imagine a world where hope is no longer a distant dream, but a living reality, where peace is not just a word spoken in speeches, but a force that transforms nations, where compassion is not a mere feeling, but an everyday practice. In the light of Easter, we are called to witness and to become a part of this transformation. The resurrection is not just a historical event, it is a radical invitation for all of humanity to embrace a new way of being. It calls us to rise above the fears and divisions that separate us, to reach out to those suffering, and to heal the wounds both within and around us. The Easter message is not bound by time or place. It transcends every barrier of culture, ideology, and geography. It speaks to the hearts of people from all walks of life, challenging us to embody love, justice, and mercy in ways that can change the course of history. Whether it's the cry for peace in war-torn lands, the solidarity with the poor and displaced, or the healing of our environment, Easter reminds us that we are all part of this ongoing story, a story that calls for action, unity, and renewal. Easter stands at the very heart of the Christian message. It is not merely a celebration fixed to the calendar, but a living proclamation, the most radical promise ever made to humanity, that life triumphs over death, hope rises from despair, and light endures beyond the darkness. At the core of the Easter message is the resurrection, a mystery not confined to theological discourse, but alive in the wounds of the world, the struggles of the people, and the silent prayers rising from the corners of the earth. The resurrection is not only an event of the past, it is a dynamic and ever-present call to transformation. When the stone was rolled away from the tomb, it did not only mark the absence of a body, it marked the presence of a new possibility. The disciples who once hid behind locked doors, gripped by fear and disillusionment, suddenly found themselves called forth into the open to proclaim peace, to embody mercy, and to build bridges where only barriers had stood. In our own time, the tomb takes many forms. It may be the isolation of the elderly, the despair of the unemployed, the grief of a mother in Gaza, the silence of a father in Ukraine, or the desperation of a child in an ignorant boat. These are the dark places where hope feels absent. Yet the resurrection teaches that no stone is too heavy, no night too long, no death so final that it can extinguish the spark of divine life placed within every human soul. This hope is not naive optimism. It is not the denial of suffering or the avoidance of conflict. It is the daring belief that love is stronger than hatred, that forgiveness can break the cycle of vengeance, and that even in the most broken of circumstances, new life can emerge. It is the hope that stands at the foot of the cross and still believes in Sunday morning. Easter hope is communal. It does not belong to one people, one church, or one tradition. It belongs to all who yearn for liberation from injustice, from addiction, from war, from the fear that paralyzes hearts and nations. The resurrection reminds us that salvation is not a private escape, but a shared journey. Just as Christ rose not for himself, but for the world, so too must our hope rise on behalf of others. In this light, the symbols of Easter become signs of our own renewal. The empty tomb becomes a symbol of open hearts. The risen body becomes the wounded body of humanity, still bearing scars, yet radiant with divine grace. The first words of the risen Christ, "Peace be with you," become a commission to become peacemakers, reconcilers, and bearers of good news in a world aching for redemption. To proclaim the resurrection, then, is not only to speak of an event that once happened, but to allow that event to shape how we see the world and how we move through it. In a world increasingly defined by conflict, displacement, and violence, the call for peace resounds not as a distant ideal, but as an urgent moral imperative. The Easter message, rooted in the resurrection of the Prince of Peace, comes alive in this context as a prophetic cry, a voice rising from the ruins, echoing in the hearts of the broken and challenging the silence of indifference. The cry for peace is not abstract, it is painfully concrete, shaped by the cries of children in war zones, the mourning of families torn apart, and the daily dread that looms over nations in turmoil. Peace, in this light, is not simply the absence of war. It is the presence of justice, the restoration of dignity, and the rebuilding of relationships fractured by fear and hatred. In Ukraine, the ground is soaked with sorrow and uncertainty, and yet even there, the human spirit clings to hope. In Gaza, the cycle of violence perpetuates suffering on all sides, yet the yearning for safety and coexistence still breathes beneath the rubble. In Myanmar, voices call out through the darkness of oppression, longing to be heard. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, generations bear the wounds of forgotten conflicts, silently enduring the trauma that rarely makes headlines. These are not just geopolitical struggles, they are human stories, soaked in tears and stained with blood, demanding more than strategic solutions. They demand compassion, truth, and courage. The Easter proclamation of peace is not timid. It does not merely ask for ceasefires, it demands transformation of policies, of systems, of hearts. It invites the powerful to lay down weapons and pick up the tools of dialogue. It challenges leaders to choose diplomacy over destruction, reconciliation over retaliation. True peace requires more than treaties. It calls for healing the inner wounds left by generations of violence. It is slow work, often invisible, and always rooted in the dignity of each person. This cry for peace must rise from every altar, every home, and every conscience. It must be voiced by mothers who have lost sons, by students robbed of classrooms, by elders whose memories carry both the agony of war and the dream of peace. It must be amplified by those with platforms and protected by those in power. In an age of noise and distraction, the message must be clear: peace is not optional, it is essential. And every delay costs lives. Even in the darkest hours of conflict, peace is still possible. It begins in the refusal to dehumanize the enemy. It grows in the decision to listen rather than accuse. It gains strength when communities risk forgiveness and when wounds, though deep, are tended with truth and grace. Peace asks for more than slogans. It asks for sacrifice, humility, and a commitment to building something that will last longer than victory, a shared future where all can live without fear. The resurrection then does not avoid the reality of suffering. It walks into it bearing the marks of the cross, and still dares to speak the words that challenge every empire and echo through every battlefield. To speak of Easter is to speak of the God who sides with the lowly, the forgotten, and those pushed to the margins. The resurrection is not a victory parade for the powerful, but a quiet revolution that begins in the shadows in a borrowed tomb among grieving women and with a message entrusted to the most unlikely messengers. It is in this spirit that solidarity with the poor and displaced becomes not only a social responsibility, but a sacred duty for those who suffer, who wander, who hunger and weep. Easter is not merely a promise of heaven, it is a call for justice here and now. The modern world is marked by a movement of people unlike any seen before. Tens of millions are displaced by war, famine, climate disasters, and economic desperation. They cross deserts, oceans, and borders not for adventure but for survival. Many never make it. Those who do often find new lands but not always new hope. They face fences, suspicion, rejection, and policies that treat them as threats rather than fellow human beings. In refugee camps, detention centers, and makeshift shelters, the cry for dignity rises like incense. It is a cry Easter must hear. Solidarity means more than pity. It requires proximity, the willingness to draw near to the suffering, not to save, but to accompany. It means seeing the poor not as burdens, but as bearers of wisdom, courage, and humanity that challenge the comfort of the privileged. In the language of faith, the poor are not outside the story, they are at its center. The face of the risen one is recognized not in golden thrones, but in broken bread and broken bodies. This solidarity extends not just to individuals, but to entire communities and cultures uprooted by forces beyond their control. It calls for policies rooted in compassion, economies that serve people rather than enslave them, and cities that open their doors as much as they build their walls. It insists that human life is never illegal and that no one should be reduced to a statistic, a file, or a problem to be managed. Every person has a name, a story, a mother who prayed for them, and a dream they were forced to leave behind. In the resurrection, the first witnesses are the ones society did not expect to matter. This flips the script. It means that those deemed invisible are in fact the most visible in the eyes of God. When a child in a refugee camp smiles, when a woman in a shelter shares her bread, when a migrant worker sends money home, with aching hands and unspoken prayers, Easter breathes again. Solidarity is not optional. In a world of rising inequality and forced migration, it is the heartbeat of faith that claims the tomb is empty and the world is still worth loving. The message of Easter, rooted in the triumph of life over death, extends far beyond the personal and into the very fabric of creation. The resurrection is not only a moment of spiritual renewal. For individuals, it is a sign of restoration for all that has been wounded, broken, and cast aside. It speaks not only to souls, but to the soil, not only to hearts, but to forests, rivers, oceans, and skies. In a time marked by ecological crisis and deepening divisions, the healing of the earth and of humanity are inseparable tasks that rise together in the light of Easter. Our planet, our common home, groans under the weight of exploitation and neglect. From the melting glaciers to the burning rainforests, from polluted waters to poisoned air, creation bears the scars of human indifference. The cry of the earth echoes the cry of the poor, for it is the most vulnerable who suffer first and most from environmental destruction. Rising sea levels swallow homes. Droughts destroy crops. Floods uproot entire communities. The devastation of nature is not a distant issue, it is a moral and spiritual emergency that demands a resurrection of conscience. Easter proclaims that nothing is beyond redemption. If the tomb can be emptied, then so too can poisoned rivers be cleansed, scorched lands be revived, and the human heart be reawakened to its responsibility. The earth, like humanity, waits for resurrection not in some distant paradise, but in our fields, our cities, our homes. The healing begins not with grand gestures, but with humble steps, planting a tree, consuming less, protecting what is small, listening to the rhythm of nature instead of the noise of greed. Yet the healing of the earth cannot be separated from the healing of human relationships. Where there is violence against creation, there is often violence against people. The same forces that exploit land often exploit labor. The same systems that extract resources without regard for tomorrow also discard the poor without a second thought. To renew the earth is to renew the covenant between human beings and all that sustains them, a covenant rooted in gratitude, not domination, in reverence, not convenience. Spiritual renewal calls for ecological conversion. It asks humanity to see creation not as a commodity but as a gift. It calls for an economy that serves life, not profit alone. It demands policies shaped by the needs of future generations, not just immediate gains. This conversion requires humility, the humility to recognize that human beings are not gods of the earth, but its caretakers, its stewards, its guests. And it requires courage, the courage to change lifestyles, to challenge the status quo, to speak for those who cannot speak, the rivers, the animals, the forests, the wind. At the heart of the Easter message is a love that does not remain distant, abstract, or symbolic. It is a love that enters wounds, touches sorrow, and responds with tenderness. The resurrection is not merely a declaration of divine power. It is a call to live differently, to love differently, to respond to the brokenness of the world not with indifference or judgment, but with radical compassion. Compassion in action becomes the visible sign of a life touched by the light of Easter, a life that refuses to pass by on the other side of the road. In every age, there is the temptation to love in theory but ignore in practice. It is easy to speak of kindness, to praise charity, to affirm the dignity of the human person from a distance. But Easter compassion does not stay behind locked doors. It walks the streets, it enters homes, it kneels in front of the hurting, and it listens. Compassion in action is not about fixing others, it is about accompanying them, sharing in their burdens, and lifting them with humility and grace. It is love made tangible in the smallest gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a meal offered, a wrong forgiven. This compassion is not reserved for the saints or the special. It belongs to all. It is the quiet power of the everyday person who checks on a neighbor, who takes time to visit the sick, who stands up for someone being treated unfairly. It is found in the nurse working late, the teacher who sees beyond grades, the worker who treats customers with dignity, the youth who helps without seeking praise. These acts, often unnoticed, form the unseen resurrection that happens all around us when love is put into motion. True compassion crosses boundaries. It does not ask for credentials or backgrounds. It reaches across religion, nationality, politics, and race. It sees first the human being, not the label. In a world increasingly divided by ideologies and suspicion, compassion becomes a revolutionary force. It softens the edges of hardened opinions. It opens hearts that have long been closed. It reminds the world that mercy is not weakness but strength born from love. This kind of compassion cannot be selective. It cannot choose who deserves kindness and who does not. The same mercy that met the disciple who denied, the thief who repented, and the crowds who doubted is the mercy that must inform every action of those who live in the spirit of Easter. Compassion in action also means standing against injustice not in hatred, but with moral clarity and peaceful resistance. It means advocating for the voiceless, challenging systems that crush the vulnerable, and refusing to grow numb in the face of suffering. It is a commitment not just to feel, but to move, to act, to build a culture where no one is forgotten and where every human life is treated as sacred. Faith, in its purest form, is never a divine wall, but a bridge, a sacred path leading people not away from one another, but toward deeper connection, mutual understanding, and reconciliation. In the light of Easter, faith is revealed not as a static possession or private treasure, but as a living force that renews hearts and reshapes communities. The resurrection is not a message meant to remain within the walls of churches or the boundaries of specific traditions. It is a proclamation meant for the whole human family, inviting all to rise from fear, suspicion, and division into the unity of shared dignity and hope. Easter faith begins with an encounter with the risen one who appears in surprising places and to unexpected people. It begins with wonder, not certainty, with awe, not arrogance. The first witnesses did not fully understand what they had seen, but they were transformed by it. This transformation opened them not only to divine truth, but to one another. Faith became the language that allowed strangers to become brothers and sisters, and enemies to be seen again as neighbors. The early Christian communities were marked not by wealth or influence, but by the quality of their unity, in diversity, their care for the poor, and their unwavering hope even in persecution. In a world fractured by mistrust, polarizing ideologies, and growing isolation, faith can once again be a wellspring of renewal, but only if it is practiced with humility, compassion, and a readiness to listen. True faith does not seek to dominate or exclude. It does not weaponize sacred texts or impose itself through fear. Instead, it testifies through service, through mercy, through the quiet witness of a life lived in harmony with both heaven and earth. Such faith draws people, and not with force but with beauty. It invites, it welcomes, it embraces without asking who is worthy. Faith also has the power to heal the wounds between communities and nations. When it turns outward toward the stranger, the wounded, the forgotten, it becomes a source of healing. It reminds humanity that beneath the surface of every culture and language, there exists the same hunger for love, for meaning, for peace. It reveals that the sacred is not confined to a single expression or tradition, but is reflected in many voices, many paths, many prayers, rising together like incense. When people of faith come together not to compete but to cooperate, not to convert but to console, they become signs of a world renewed in trust and possibility. This unity does not erase difference. It celebrates it. It allows space for dialogue, for questions, for the slow work of building relationships that last. Faith lived in this way becomes a witness to something higher than opinion and stronger than conflict. It becomes a sanctuary in the heart of the world, a place where wounds can breathe, where walls can fall, and where life, even when broken, can be made whole again through love that does not end with the tomb but begins there. As we reflect on the profound messages of hope, peace, solidarity, healing, compassion, and unity, let us remember that the essence of Easter is not just in the celebration of an event, but in the transformation it calls forth in each of us. It urges us to live as people of faith, compassion, and action. It challenges us to rise above division and fear, to walk alongside the suffering, to care for the earth, and to reach out to one another with open hearts and hands. The resurrection is not a distant promise. It is a living call that we can answer today in our lives, our choices, and our relationships. May we each carry the spirit of Easter into the world, shining light where there is darkness, offering peace where there is conflict, and providing hope where despair seems to reign. As we continue on this journey, let us be instruments of unity, healers of division, and bearers of compassion, walking the path of love that transcends all boundaries. May you go forward with strength and clarity, guided by the wisdom of these principles. May your hearts be filled with the courage to bring about the changes you wish to see in the world. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to making this world a better place. Good luck on your journey ahead, and may peace, hope, and love accompany you every step of the way.